Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Scott Sargrad, and I'm the Vice President for K-12 Education Policy here at the Center for American Progress. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is the third installment of our Ensuring a Quality Education for Every Child web series. And today's conversation is about preparing K through 8 students for the future of work. And if you missed the first two events in the series, you can find recordings of them at our website, which is americanprogress.org/events. We're going to have two more events following this one, next Wednesday, May 27th, and then the following Wednesday, June 3rd, both also at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so keep an eye out for those as well. So today we're going to be discussing ways to expand opportunity and build equitable access to college in the future workforce by supporting educators, increasing offerings, and deeply engaging families beginning in elementary school. We know that in K-12 education, a lot of times preparation for the future of work is focused on the high school level and things like college and career pathways and improving career and technical education. But we also know that the K through 8 grades are critical for getting students and families ready for those new opportunities in high school and beyond. We're also going to talk about how the current COVID-19 crisis impacts some of these questions about the future of work and what that means for schools and students and families. We're going to save about 15 minutes at the end for audience questions, so encourage you to submit those through the question function on your screen or on Twitter. We're using the hashtag QualityEdChat, and so we'll be monitoring that as well. And you can also, and if we don't get to your question, continue the conversation online with that hashtag, and we'll be responding over the coming days and weeks with our whole web series with that hashtag. So I'm joined today by three really fantastic panelists that we're really excited to have here. They all bring different perspectives and experiences to this conversation. So I'm going to do some brief introductions, and then we'll turn it over to each of them to tell you all a little bit more about themselves and their relationship to this work. So first, we have Dr. Amy Lloyd, who is a vice president at JFF, where she guides leaders in developing and scaling effective and sustainable policies, infrastructure, and practices that support learners and workers and lead to equitable outcomes, and particularly through college and career pathways. For those who don't know, JFF is a national nonprofit organization. They design and drive innovation and integration of education and workforce systems and to ensure economic advancement opportunities for all. And they've been a leader for the past 36 years in career-focused learning and career readiness. So we're super excited to have Amy here today. Next is Victor Scotti, who is a 7-year diversity, equity, and inclusion and human resources leader at Google. And he's spent a significant portion of his time in the education equity space, and he's managed programs like the Computer Science Summer Institute for HBCU students and the Tech Exchange program for HBCU and HSI students. And then next we have Juanita Price, who is an elementary educator in Indianapolis, Indiana, and she is very passionate about nurturing foundational skills for her students. She's also a former Teach Plus teaching policy fellow. So thank you all again for being with us. We're really excited to get started. And why don't we just jump in, and for each of you, maybe can you tell us a little bit more about yourselves and your work in this space? And maybe we can start with Amy.
Sure, thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. As Scott said, my name is Amy Lloyd. I'm a vice president at JFF, and I come to JFF with a background in K-12 education. I was previously a middle school and high school teacher, a principal, and area superintendent. I've done work at the state and federal levels in education policy, and I still have a foot in teaching through teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, a course on college and career pathways. My passion is where JFF sits, which is at the intersection of education, workforce development, economic development, and policy research and practice. Like, how can we bring the best of what we know works and also innovate in new spaces to ensure that all young people, especially young people of color, students who come from low-income families and low-income communities, students who haven't had as immediate access to opportunities in high growth, high wage, high demand careers, have seamless pathways and supports in place to ensure that they're successful in school, in college, in workforce, in life beyond, in their communities, and really are able to exercise meaningful choice and self-determination in how they navigate the transitions between school, higher ed, and the world of work. And so I'm very glad to be with you today, and I'm glad to be representing JFF, which really thinks about people, places, and systems, and how we improve existing systems and also drive the development of new systems to help better support people to lead fulfilled lives.
Thanks, Amy. We're really excited to have you here. Victor, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. So, hi, everyone. My name is Victor Scotty. I am originally from Chicago, Illinois. I actually moved back to Chicago a couple of years ago. So, really proud of that. I come from a family of educators, particularly at the middle school and elementary school level. I was in Chicago public schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. And so I think for me, like education, equity, and access, that was always a conversation in my household, and something that I think I kind of took on both professionally and also academically. Also, growing up, was a participant in a lot of programs with the University of Chicago, other civic organizations. So I've always been really interested in how all these institutions can come together in support of students, families, neighborhoods, and schools. So not just putting everything in the actual school walls, but how can we come together as a community and really support students? At Google and professionally, been focused a lot in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and also the ed equity space. So we have a number of different programs. I've been really proud of the work that we've been able to do being intentional about historically excluded groups. So when we say that, we really mean women, Latinx, and Black students. And also Googlers further down the pipeline. So I primarily work with college students or entering college students. But of course, when we talk about the different choices or representation, all these things that we talk about when we kind of receive the students at Google, it's really a reflection on that K through 12 experience. So really entering the conversation from that STEM perspective, and also kind of from that corporate entity perspective, and how we can leverage technology and leverage our skills and interests in tech to really support students through their educational careers and then also their professional lives.
Thanks, Victor. We're really lucky to have you with us today. And next we have Juanita Price. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself too?
Yes, thank you, Scott. And I appreciate that I'm here. So I'll say that basically being an elementary educator, I've learned that everything that Amy and Victor said, we do need to show that at as low as kindergarten, because first the students need to know that the things that they enjoy doing, they can have access to it. And then we also need to have the parents understand that it's a possibility that we can start preparing them that early so that they have the opportunity. So I am a first generation college student, and community was big for me. So it's really important that we get the community involved in, as well, in making sure that there's access within the schools to get them ready for the future of work.
That's great. Thank you, Juanita. I love what you're saying about getting the community involved. We're definitely going to talk about that and some strategies there. So I'm excited to hear from you all. And so just a reminder again for everyone, if you have questions for the panel, please submit those through the chat or through the questions tab or online, and we'll get to those towards the end. But why don't we get started with a question that I have, which is about how you all see the workforce changing as a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the economic crisis that we're in right now, either short or long term. And what do you think that means for how schools prepare students for this future workforce? Do you think there are any implications for what we as researchers, advocates, policymakers need to be thinking about, what schools and districts need to be thinking about as they're kind of getting ready for next year and the next few years? And Victor, maybe you could kick us off on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great question. I think there are a couple of things that I would say. I think in the short term, I think we've seen the workforce just take a complete shift in many directions. But I think especially when we think about tech and that lens, we very quickly had to pivot everything virtual and remote, right? So I think that we had a little bit, maybe a lot of the leg up, because like working from home was something that we could do, periodically. I think, the notion of collaborating across time zones and different things, we already were doing this stuff. We have research about it, both internally and externally. And so at least that was in our lexicon. But when we think about the work that we do actually with students, and that affects me and the work that I do really acutely, a lot of what we do, and kind of the cornerstone of what we do when we work with our students, is really creating that community. So we know that in tech, especially when we're talking about historically excluded groups, them being in community with one another for that support, but also with Googlers and seeing themselves, we've thus far rooted that in a physical experience. So programs like the Computer Science Summer Institute, it's a summer program, right? Tech Exchange is a semester-long program. So we really quickly had to pivot a lot of our access programs to a virtual model. And so I think what came out of that, in essence, I think in the tech industry, it really brought us back to our roots in a lot of ways of like seamless collaboration, speed, being really efficient. So we actually had to really use and dig into all the tools and things that we have. But I think that the thing that in the short term that we're not able to focus on a lot is like really that community building piece. And then I think more broadly, that culture keeping and culture building. So when we think about the cultures that we want to develop at companies, when you have folks onboarding remotely, like what does that look like? I think it requires you to be a lot more intentional. And so I think in the long term, I think as the workforce and as individual companies and as industries, we'll have to really think about what exactly do we want our culture to look like? And then how do we communicate that? Because if I'm onboarding in the short term, and who knows how long this will last, like from my home, I'm not able to talk to folks, while I'm grabbing coffee, or kind of having those short walks and short chats with people, right? Or being able to come together for orientation. I also think specifically with tech, a lot of our perks and things are definitely based in the physical realm. So food, right? Having that casual environment. And I think those things tend to dominate the narrative. So I think we'll also have to reevaluate a little bit, like what is our like kind of secret sauce? Like what is special, about our industry? And I think, and like, how are we going to move forward and how are we going to continue to promote that? And then I think for students, I think that we're going to have to come together as a community and really kind of think about how do we like communicate and how do we kind of teach, in essence, like what it means to work in a virtual world. I think that there's so much technology all around. When I visit classrooms and the work that I do with students, we use technology all the time, but it's still like a tool that we're using. But when that tool actually becomes like the medium and like the sole medium, how do we kind of transition from being super casual to being professional, right? Like maybe you are in banking, right? But you're still virtual. So maybe that means you can't wear like what I'm wearing. You still got to wear that suit, right? At least on the top half, right? So how do we communicate those things and actually teach and inculcate students in what that culture looks like? And then I think the last thing I'll say is we especially have to look out for our historically excluded groups, because we know that it's even harder to foster cultures of inclusion and belonging remotely. That is something that we already know. So we're going to have to be that much more intentional about making sure that we're able to do that in a way that's effective.
Scott, can I jump in on this question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say, like, +1 to everything that Victor just shared. And when I think about the changing workforce as a result of COVID, like there are unimaginably enormous consequences, not just for the workforce of today, but long-lasting ramifications into the future. And of course, we have tens of millions of people suddenly unemployed, tens of millions of people furloughed and facing wage cuts and needing to juggle responsibilities and really suddenly worrying more about the foundational level of Maslow's hierarchy than the top of self-actualization. And while I have a lot of worry, and JFF is working really hard to support systems to think about adults and dislocated workers, I really am thinking about how we stand to risk creating an entire generation of young people who are even more disconnected from the world of work than before. And career-focused learning for all students is essential. And often it's relegated to the realm of those who are fortunate to be enrolled in high-quality career and technical education programs, or to have a special teacher or teachers who are dedicated to making the real-world applications and connections to the world of careers in their classrooms. But really, every student, regardless of their educational trajectory, is headed to a career. And right now, given how the world of education is transitioning to take place entirely outside of classrooms, driven by tech, without in-person connections beyond family members or people who live with young learners. I worry that career-focused learning is going to be the first thing to go, and it may be omitted altogether as we're struggling to redesign and deliver education in this era of quarantining and social distancing, and just making sure that students are getting their foundational numeracy and literacy. But I would argue that career readiness is just as foundational as literacy and numeracy, and digital literacy as well. And thinking about like the industry sectors that are most impacted the most by COVID are those that are the sectors that are typically providing students with their first job. So things like retail or food services or hospitality and tourism. And we know that young people are already, marginalized from the workforce and struggling with youth unemployment pre-COVID. Now that we're facing this post-COVID world, I worry that not only will students not be getting the career readiness supports to learn about the world of work in their K-8 or K-12 trajectories, but they won't get their first job experience either. So I want us to think about like how we reinvent our education systems given COVID to ensure that students can, alongside core content, really learn to explore themselves and their possible futures, think about, what it means to engage in the economy today so that they can make meaningful decisions like what is the gig economy, or, what are the benefits and trade-offs of seeking a part-time job, or what are the economic advancement potentials when you're following your passions, or what is a career trajectory starting with a first job to a next step, and how do you broker your knowledge and skills in a marketplace that's highly competitive and radically upended. How do we help students understand the invisible structures of power, race, and gender and status in the workplace? Like, these are all essential skills that students as early as elementary school, but certainly middle grades and high school, need to start thinking about. And it's seldom done in structured education settings where students are able to go to school. And now that students are not consistently able to go to in-person settings, I just worry about that disconnect even more, and the foundational role that like work plays in human lives, and how we help young people set a vision and hope for their future and develop the skills to achieve that vision.
So I would like to jump in. So first I want to say everything that both of you said just made me think from the elementary teacher like standpoint. So first, Wi-Fi is definitely essential, and that's something that we've been talking about, obviously making sure that everybody has access. But when we get on our Zoom calls, I make sure norms are set. So the student, I'm telling them like, you're only here with me for like an hour. Like, we're still in a classroom. I need you to sit. I need you to stay on the camera. Like, so making sure that they know that we've ramped up the SEL, social emotional learning, so that they can express how they feel, understand that it's okay to feel how they feel, and trying to explain to them why we're not there. I teach second grade, so they don't understand. And some parents are like, what do I tell them? Like, they just didn't see you one day, and now they can't see you unless they're able to join. And a lot of them, unfortunately, can't join even on Zoom because they don't have Wi-Fi or they don't have devices. So it's like, we have to even make sure we have those things to ensure that we're able to have those, continue to build a community and have those conversations with our students. And I know for some of the contingency plans, like what is going to happen next, we've specifically asked teachers, what does the classroom look like, feel like, and what can we do to replicate that in a virtual setting? So even just having that mindset of, this is what it felt like for me, this is what it did for my students, so now how can I replicate that even if we have to continue virtual for however long? So just those conversations are important as well.
Yeah, and Juanita, I'm glad you brought up some of the access gaps that we have in terms of Wi-Fi and devices and things like that, because whatever we're talking about in terms of right now or post-COVID, we are going to have to deal with those issues, and we're not going to be able to have any kind of equitable access to the programs that we're talking about if we don't have equitable access to some of those core resources that students don't actually all have. I'm interested, we released a report here at CAP a couple of weeks ago that was focused on high schools and the class of 2020 and sort of what states and school districts are doing to provide guidance to graduating seniors about how they can transition to college, transition to the world of work, if they're in a career pathways program, or what are their graduation requirements for high school, that sort of thing. But I'm wondering what you all think about what are some of the things that elementary and middle schools can continue to do to support families and students around these ideas of career exploration and future of work? And what are some things that you've seen work well? What do you think sort of needs to change? And maybe, Amy, we can start with you and some of the work that you all do at JFF on possible futures. Like, how does that program kind of work in middle schools, and what do you see as successful?
Sure. Thanks for mentioning that, Scott. At JFF, we've worked with incredible partners in the field and really smart talent internally to JFF to build out an extensive curriculum called Possible Futures. So if you Google JFF Possible Futures, you will find all of the content online, and we're actually in the process of hiring some entrepreneurs to help us prototype how to quickly move this to a digital platform that would be available for both mobile devices and computers, because a challenge we do see is that many of our low-income students and families might have a smartphone, but they might not have a computer or Wi-Fi. So how do we ensure that content is equitably accessible for all learners to be able to engage in meaningful ways? But Possible Futures is a curriculum designed for modular use, and some middle schools have used it as an elective course. Some middle schools have used it as augmenting core content courses. Some out of school, after school learning time, informal learning settings have used it for after school or summer camps or winter break camps. And some schools have been using it as elements to embed in advisory. And what it is it's a college and career exploration curriculum that's designed with 3 different components. One is around STEM exploration, and having young people in such a rich developmental stage where they're starting to figure out who they are in relationship to others, in relationship to the world writ large, help them try on different identities in STEM careers and understand what it would be like to work in those careers and get real sort of authentic problem solving and problem-based learning challenges to do individually and in classroom and in real world settings. Another element of the curriculum is around skills for success, and really thinking about what are the foundational, essential employability skills, soft skills, social emotional skills, whatever you want to call them, but how can students think explicitly about those when they're so often implicit in workplace settings, and learn how to develop them and practice them. And then the last piece is really thinking about lenses on the future and how young people think about what they might want to be and what they might want to do. And it's really challenging often. I have a middle school daughter, and for her, a job that would pay $20,000 a year would sound like an unimaginable amount of money. And so it's helping young people think about how do you not just think about your passions and what are you interested in and what do you care about, but also what is the economic security of your passions? What are the career opportunities? What's a living wage? How far will $20,000 as an artist, which is my daughter's career aspiration right now, and I love her art, but what would that get her? Would it allow her to have the life that she wants to live? Would it allow her to raise a family and stay in our hometown? And then also thinking about societal impact and what are the problems that young people are interested in solving and connecting to communities. So we think about self, society, and security as the lenses on the future. So many career exploration programs start and stop with what's in your heart and what do you care about and what do you want to do. But we, now more than ever in the era of COVID, want students to start understanding how to make informed decisions about their next steps that really do connect to career opportunities in their local region, in their state, on the global scale, at whatever level they're seeking to pursue their passions, but really connect it concretely to opportunity and help them think through next steps and implications beyond themselves to community. So it's a great curriculum that's open source and available to anyone to use, and JFF has a whole suite of services around it where we can help support you in building the capacity to use it. And it's designed for paraprofessionals, for teachers, and now we're thinking about how to adapt it so that families can start integrating this into the middle grade student learning. So it's really designed for grades 6 through 10 with an emphasis on middle school.
I really like you're talking about integrating that or creating something that can be used by families too. And it seems like that's a big piece at the early grades, like how do you not just help students understand some of these issues, but how do you talk to families about it too that might not otherwise have access to this kind of information? And I'm wondering, Juanita, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think about this issue of like job quality, essentially. And Amy, I'm glad you brought this up. Like, how do you talk to elementary school students and their families about issues of career paths and making sure that the aspirations they have are align with what is going to be a good job and what's going to give them the wages and benefits and stability that's going to let them eventually support their family while also kind of supporting their passions and their exploration.
Yeah, so what I've tried to do, because this is my first year in second grade, so I've traditionally taught even younger students, kindergarten, but making sure that I bring in guest speakers who are culturally relevant, but also representative of the fields that we're speaking about. So they have the opportunity to talk to them, see what they do. They tell them, like the guest speakers will share with the students, like, I went to school, I liked school. These are the subjects that I had to master. Like, these are the things I had to do in order to get here. So it helps the students understand, like, okay, I have to be in school and this is why I have to do well at this because I want to do what they're doing. And this is how I get there. And then specifically, we had a family STEM night where we welcomed the entire family in, and we had a lot of different careers, professionals available, and they were able to rotate through stations so that they could speak with them even then. So let the parents know this is your child's desire, this is their passion, this is what they like to do, here's how they can get there. So not only are the students getting that in the classroom or at the school, now the parents see as well, like, oh, this is obtainable. So they now have the skills and the resources, and they know how we can help support the students to get there. So I think it's really important, especially in elementary school, to ensure that the parents know, like, this is something that your child can do. And if it is their passion, let's talk about what we need to do here and now. So those foundational skills are important to me because I'm hoping that they are transferred into skills that they need for life.
Another quick
And if
note
I
on
could,
family. I was just going to say that regardless of family background, like even the most high wealth, high performing professional adults only know the industry sector in which they work. And so I think about, all families, especially families that haven't had as wide exposure to as wide an array of industry possibilities, struggle with explaining to young people what the careers of today are, much less the careers of tomorrow. And so, and our educators often come up through education as our career pathway, and our trajectory to success was through a four-year college and then working in educational settings. So how do we know about what's happening in advanced manufacturing, in the world of biotech, in the world of the array of technicians and healthcare possibilities? And it's, unless you seek to learn this, you don't experience it in your day-to-day life as a professional. So even families that are, by all external measures successful in the professional world and should be able to guide their students really aren't, because we only know what we know. And so that's where I think supports like Juanita's providing and bringing in, real world examples and connections beyond people's experience is so valuable for families and students alike.
yeah, if I could just jump in too, I also think that this is a really unique moment because I would totally plus one all the things that Amy and Juanita said. And what really stands out for me is representation, right? So, like seeing yourself doing an array of different things. And I think, especially at that K-8 level, like when I remember back to the things that I wanted to do at the time, which ranged from fireman to police officer, like all things that eventually I cycled out of. But I remember different presentations or different activities, right? Where I was able to say, oh, this is something that I can do. So I think in addition to like some of that programming that we can do with families, in addition to possible futures and the ways in which they really break down in a curriculum way, how you can explore. I also think that right now that everything is virtual, of course, that with that barrier of access. So if you have Wi-Fi, and I hope that we continue to, as a community, really band together to make sure that folks have the access that they need. But I think of organizations like the National Urban League, right, who they focus particular on the workforce. And a lot of the conferences and different opportunities that were physical and in person and might have required a ticket are now virtual, right? A lot of things like with Google and other tech companies are now virtual. So I think it's such a moment to explore different pathways and different things that are happening. And I think that as long as you have Wi-Fi, I think there's so many things now that were cost prohibitive before that might not be. And there are things that folks can do as families, along with like your students and whoever is available to really sit down and explore and have really rich dialogue about what the opportunities are post-COVID.
Yeah, and that's interesting. There might actually be more opportunities for some of this for more people because, like you said, of all the virtual opportunities that are available and people putting things online and making things freely available that otherwise, like you said, would require travel and a hotel room and a registration fee and all these other things. And I want to keep going on this idea of how we can use these topics we're talking about to close some of the equity gaps that we see later on in high school and in post-secondary in the workforce. Because one of the reasons we at CAP are really interested in the elementary and middle grades is because we know that there are enormous gaps that exist as soon as you get to high school and certainly before. And we think that we know that high schools that serve mostly Black and Latino students, that serve mostly students from families with low incomes, they have less access to higher level courses, less access to things like dual enrollment, AP. But even when students attend schools that have those courses available, a lot of times, again, Black and Latino students and students from families with low incomes, they aren't in those courses. And so how do we sort of think about the elementary and middle grades as a way to prepare students to be ready for those courses and be successful once they get to them, in addition to focusing on providing access in all schools? So I'm wondering like how you all think that why you all think we should be focusing on elementary and middle schools. Like, does that resonate with you all? How else can we sort of use this focus on elementary and middle school to help close some of these gaps by race and income? Juanita, maybe could ask you to start here and some of what you're thinking again as an elementary teacher and why sort of that grade band is so important.
Yeah, so research shows that students are most impressionable within like first 5 years, right? And parents are also very excited during those first 5 years. So it's like we have to find and keep that excitement and joy going. But again, that's why those foundational skills are important, because as we build those skills, the students understand why they need to do certain things. This is how we do certain things. And it also says, research, I can't remember where we read it, but we were using it during our retention conversations, unfortunately. But it says it's so much easier to do what we need to do with students when they're like K2, because that's when they're learning how to read. That's when they're learning how to use the skills that we're providing. And then third up, they're then using the skills that we taught in K2. And now they were learning to read, now they're learning to read, and they're doing a lot of things more independent, and it's more difficult to remediate. So we have to get the parents, educators, everybody to understand, like, if we can do everything to help build that foundation at the beginning, the understanding, the excitement and the joy, all of it at once, it'll just keep those students and parents, hopefully it'll keep them more engaged. And then to the point of what they need to do in high school, if they know this is why I'm doing this now and everything builds on each other, I think that'll help them stay that much more invested. So even if it is difficult, even if it's not as fun as they thought it would be, they just know that if you stick to it, this leads to this, and this is why it's important.
You know, I would also add too, I think it's really important, particularly at the K through 8 level, to really also tackle unconscious bias. And I think this is something that can kind of be attacked at any level, whether it's in a particular classroom, at school, a school district, or more broadly. Because like I remember for me, it was around like 4th or 5th grade. Like I distinctly remember messages of that, like that I wasn't very good at like math and science. And I think there are multiple things wrong with that, bucketing the two together. Those are two completely different subjects and different skill sets. Also, when I looked at, I was in a very diverse classroom, but when I look at like who was deemed good and who wasn't, it looked very different, right? And so, what we know is, as you outlined, Scott, you have to, even with that access to some of those critical courses, so like in terms of STEM, well, I'll say computer science, excuse me, more particular, like calculus in high school is actually really crucial to get into those really good computer science programs in college, and then to be able to end up at companies like a Google or a Facebook, if that's, what you desire. So we can map it all the way back to that K through 8, K through 12 space. And if you have these messages that are telling you that you're not good enough, or this is not for you, even if those opportunities are available, you might not take advantage of those. And it takes years of deprogramming, and I know that from personal experience, to then be comfortable. So I also think there's a lot, of course, that we can do again in terms of representation. It definitely what Juanita said in terms of like capturing students at that impressionable age and making sure that they understand the steps required. But I also think as a community, and understanding that we're in a system, right, and we're in an inequitable system overall. I think it's also really, really important that we also consider and attack the different lenses that we're entering classrooms or conversations with students in. And I also want to make sure I say that this is not like only from the lens of the educator. I think that there are so many people that interact with students inside of a school and outside of a school. So I think we all need to be conscious of how we're engaging with students and what we're consciously or unconsciously telling them that they can be or the things that they can do.
I totally agree. And I am thinking about both of your comments, Victor and Juanita, and thinking about, you've got to see it to be it and how important representation is, especially for younger ages, and how kids as young as elementary school age start deselecting career options based on what they're experiencing in their worlds. And so I don't want young people to foreclose on opportunities that they have endless potential to pursue simply because they haven't seen it reflected in the world around them, or someone told them that you're not really a science kid, or you don't really are, maybe you should focus on, something other than math. And there are these subtle, inadvertent, or sometimes deliberate signals that we send students that then narrow their options instead of widening their possibilities. And I think about how we might better structure our schools to connect with community more. I mean, families obviously are a key role in students and the number one influence on students' kind of choices in what they're doing in their middle grade years, their high school years, and what they end up pursuing in life beyond. But helping students and families understand that the decisions that they make in elementary school impact their trajectory in middle school, which impacts the classes that they can take in high school, which then narrows their post-secondary possibilities, and understanding how community supports can engage at every step along the way, so that it's not just on families and it's not just on schools to help young people understand the connections of their decisions today and how they might envision a possible future for themselves tomorrow, but really bring community members, employers, community-based organizations, faith-based communities into the classroom to also, or into the learning space, whatever that may be, to also help support students widening their possibilities. And think like all students have social capital, like all students have rich connections to family and friends and community, but not all social capital has access to the same levels of career exploration power. And so how do we give students who have been historically kind of excluded from access to those systems and structures of deliberate learning about power an entryway into that? How do we help students get a leg up on career by not by having an uncle who owns a company or having a neighbor who hires you for the summer, but instead by having structured learning opportunities that allows you to have meaningful work-based learning opportunities in a more equitable way. And so helping students build social capital and think differently about their possibilities. It takes a village.
This is great. I'm loving this conversation, and I think like building on sort of both of these comments, and Victor, what you were talking about around some of the STEM fields, and specifically around computer science, and one of the things that you all have sort of worked on is around career readiness, career exploration in these STEM fields. And Juanita with the Family STEM Nights that you were talking about, Victor obviously with Google and the HBCU and MSI initiative, and Amy with Possible Futures. And do you think that given the current need that we have right now around with the pandemic for STEM trained workers, thinking about things like tech, healthcare, research, do you think that need is going to persist? Is it going to increase? And how do you think that schools and districts can provide some opportunities for students from communities that have historically been shut out of those high wage, high growth STEM fields? What are some of the strategies, particularly at the elementary and middle level, but broadly, that we can use to increase access to these types of career paths?
You know, I think that this, I was going
go
to,
ahead, Victor.
yeah, I was going to add that I think that this could be a good opportunity, and it would behoove us to really lean into the technology that is available. Something that's coming up for me in this conversation is like virtual reality, machine learning. And again, I think that we have to make sure that access is available, you know, to Wi-Fi. But I think of something that we have, Google Cardboard, which are really actually like super cheap to make. And you can like put the headset on, right? And you can, you know, quite literally be transported to different worlds, like using a QR code on your phone or on your computer. You can be transported into this module, right? So when I think about career, you know, exploration, right? Or, and not just for students, but also for families and other community members, I think of really like leaning into that technology that we have. Again, like being cost effective and efficient about it. And really putting the onus on companies like Google and Facebook, which we know can really help in this way, and actually have a lot of initiatives and pathways where we're connected to the community more broadly anyway. So in a lot of ways, we're doing a lot of this work, but actually really catapulting that and thinking about it in new ways. Thinking about how you can put on a VR headset or Google Cardboard and be, you know, in a room, right, with doctors doing surgery, or, you know, or doctors talking about, you know, their different cases, right? Be in a courtroom, be in a tech company. So I'm thinking back to what Juanita said about how you all have been given the charge of really thinking about your classroom and what it looks like, what it feels like. We actually have the technology that we've been working on for years and decades at this point that we can put into play to really bring some of these things to life. So again, I think that we're in a moment where I think different industries, we actually have to come together and use the best of what we have. Educators, you know, technology companies, economic development and workforce folks, we have to really come together and use the best of what we have to provide opportunities for all. And I think it's not a question of if we can do it. It's about like when we will do it and if we'll be able to collaborate effectively. So the short answer is I absolutely think that the need persists, and I think that it's possible. And I think that this is a moment where we can use our technology to really expand access further than we have before.
So, Victor, I will reach out to you after this because I had an idea as you were talking, but I think that it's very important that we make sure that the educators are very well trained, very well versed, and obviously with the collaboration with the community partners that will help us. But I was literally sitting here thinking like how wonderful it would be if everybody was trained already. Like we don't know how long this is going to go on, so we need to find a way to make sure that parents know how to troubleshoot these different platforms that we're using, the learning management systems and all of that. Like we have to be forward thinking at this point. Like we have to make sure that the students have access and that the parents know how to use everything that we're expecting them to use, that the teachers are trained so that we know how to troubleshoot if the parents need it. Like it's just so much training that needs to happen, but it can happen. So, yeah.
And jumping on really quickly on the STEM train, like there's no doubt that STEM skills will remain essential competencies. And right now in the short term, particularly in fields that you mentioned, Scott, like healthcare and IT and research, like that's going to help us get through this crisis. But we also know that STEM skills alone are not sufficient, and that there's an increasing body of research around how STEM skills paired with kind of essential human skills are really what are, you know, the magic ingredients for success in the workplace. Because I think about what Victor was talking about in terms of automation and artificial intelligence. And I think often, you know, machine learning, when we think about the future of work, we envision this like robotic apocalypse, or, you know, the machines taking away our jobs. And really, like, the unique niche that we as humans play is our humanity in the workplace and our ability to reason through, you know, non-routine tasks, to solve problems creatively, and to apply our STEM learning in practice. And so it needs to be a both and of really, you know, technical skills coupled with really foundational interpersonal skills, creativity, problem solving, the things that we know that computers and machines won't be able to do in the same way that humans can. So how do we ensure that students are being set up for success on a trajectory that is not going to be susceptible to automation, but instead really builds on the best of their passions and their skill sets while integrating STEM and humanity?
That's great. This has been such a rich conversation. I'm so excited. So I'm going to turn a little bit to our audience questions. Again, we've got a bunch of them been coming in, but reminder to please submit those either through the question box or online with the hashtag #QualityEdChat. And one that I would love to ask you all about is that we got a question about how you all see the pandemic impacting how the workforce sector and the K-12 education sector can work together to help things kind of get back to normal. So how do you see the two sectors linking together more going forward? Again, this is something we're really interested in at CAP too, is how do you bridge across what are often pretty disconnected sectors of education and the workforce?
Our structures and systems are very siloed for them, and they've lived in different worlds for a whole host of reasons: policy, funding, different target populations, different age ranges. But I would argue that, you know, all education is in some part workforce development, and all workforce development is education. You know, there should be an integration and alignment and a stronger connection between the two. And what I love about the K-8 space and even the whole K-12 space is it's not workforce development with a lens on the urgency of someone who is out of work and needs a job tomorrow or next week, and how do we get them an immediate skill or an immediate credential to plug into whatever job just to get the bills paid. Instead, we have the opportunity to help students have a longer on-ramp to explore workforce potential in the K-12 space, make some meaningful choices about post-secondary credentials as a starting place, and to map out a full trajectory of a career pathway that, frankly, you know, the lay of the land today is lifelong learning. Like, it used to be that one went to school and then one went to some form of post-secondary education and training, college, trade school, whatever it may be, and then one got a job and worked in that job, and then you retired, and then that was that. And now it's no longer a linear process. Like, education and workforce development need to be woven throughout a person's life, because we are all going to need to be reskilling and upskilling, as COVID is showing us in stark detail. And we anticipate, you know, the counter-cyclical nature of recessions pushing a lot of adults back into education. And so similarly, I want to make sure that our young people are well prepared to navigate the choices that they need to make about workforce development, just as much as our adult populations need to navigate meaningful choices about education throughout all of our lives.
Yeah, I also think that I was going to say, I think that we're at a moment where we're not going to be able to just go back to like pre-COVID for anything. So I think that there will be a necessity for us to sit down and think in terms of like education. We have to think about how students are progressing in terms of like going to the next grade, you know, like those very technical elements of like grading and promotion and all of those things. And I think it would be such a missed opportunity if we also didn't say, you know what are the like emerging skill sets or things that we need now because XYZ industry insert all of them, are going to look very different. And because of where we've landed, hopefully after, this pandemic, we need students to be prepared in these ways. And so I actually think that like those are the conversations that we need to have. And I also think that like kind of like how Juanita was talking about, like teachers, like we need training, we need these. I think so. Some of those conversations, even though it might start off granular, I think that those can actually open the door for broader collaboration.
Yeah, so what I was going to add on to that was the project-based learning piece. So you literally said it, Victor. If there was a way for us to say these are the skills that we need right now, how would that translate into what we can teach in school? And then have the students begin to work on these projects and see what that'll look like when it's time for them to be there. And then maybe you could like zoom in and say, yes, you're doing a great job with that. Like, keep it going.
I was a math teacher many years ago, and almost every day I would get a student say like, oh, why do we have to learn this? When are we ever going to use this? And I wish I knew, 25 years ago what I know now about how to better integrate real world connections into classroom learning experiences. And so, we haven't talked a lot about work-based learning today, but thinking about ways to get young people, even in middle grades, engaged in more direct workplace experiences, recognizing that in this COVID era right now, there is no such thing as an in-person workplace. So how do we use online platforms and virtual reality and other modalities for remote engagement in work-based learning? But how do we ensure that those opportunities are equitably accessible to students and not just to those who have the connections? So I feel like there's such an opportunity right now to reinvent education altogether. And, shame on us if we go back to the pre-COVID world and our structures and systems, because those silos were already broken. Like, if anything, COVID is shining a really bright light on the existing disparities and inequities in outcomes that have been here for a very long time. And this also provides us with a really unique opportunity to reinvent how we better connect the world of work and the world of learning and ensure equity embedded throughout. So I know that we have huge challenges ahead, but I'm also excited and determined to make things better for our kids.
And one of the other questions we got from the chat is sort of related to this and also related to something that Juanita, you were talking about early on, which is now that we are in this virtual learning space in K-12 schools, what's the best way to teach students to expand their knowledge of technology and this idea of virtual professionalism in the classroom? So is it that we integrate technology in the classroom kind of the way we've been doing it? Are there separate classes that are devoted to virtual learning, virtual professionalism, how you work in a virtual environment? What do you think the strategy is here?
So Amy said it earlier, both and. There should absolutely be classes specifically on, like I can't teach everything. So the classes that would teach how to use these platforms would be a separate thing. But in the class, I would have to let the students be independent. I believe in productive struggle. Like go ahead and work through that, figure out how you can get it. And then even if I need help, I'll pull in that technology teacher or whatever their title would be. And then I actually took note of this. I said something about like even have, how we do book clubs and stuff. Like at this point now, we can still do those things in a virtual platform. So then it's also teaching them how to navigate through the different things that they're doing. So yes, I definitely think we need to do both and.
I think we probably got time for one or two more questions, maybe just one more question from the chat. One thing, so I wanted to come back to this discussion about STEM, and we got a question about what strategies are you implementing to specifically inspire girls to enter STEM fields? So the fact that we know that girls see STEM differently than boys, and we do have some of the same unconscious and conscious biases around girls in STEM as we were talking about with Black and Latino and Native students. So how do you sort of help address some of those biases and provide pathways for girls into STEM fields?
I mean, I would start by saying there's some wonderful organizations that are literally focused on this. Two that come to mind, and this is by no means exhaustive, but Girls Who Code and Black Girls Code. So I think that like those organizations, like they are the experts in that. I think from my observations, so actually Black Girls Code, they have like a space within the Google New York office. So that's really dope. Like our policy team and the leadership of Black Girls Code worked that out. So from my observations, it goes back to that idea of representation. So, you know, so when I'm there, they're like women engineers, right, are there, you know, working with the young women. I also think having very targeted conversations about like the industry, about, you know, breaking down some of those stereotypes related to the industry, and kind of getting really granular about like what would it look like to actually work here. So I would say a combination of, you know, literally seeing yourself through mentorship, through that kind of peer-to-peer learning. There's a lot of research that shows that that's really helpful, but also literally just like being in the space and actually doing it so that you emerge from those experiences like, oh, I can do this. Like I can be at Google, at Facebook. Actually, I was already there, right? So like I can do this. So I think that I think those are the things that I've observed that are key. But I think there are amazing organizations and folks who are working in that field in particular and have amazing outcomes.
And very quickly, I was just going to quickly say that the woman who developed our Possible Futures curriculum had a lens on gender equity in creation of it. And so in the STEM-focused modules, the STEM-focused modules are all problem-based, kind of professional-based learning opportunities where students put themselves in the shoes of a professional tackling challenges across tech, across engineering and manufacturing, across health sciences. And we found that there's a gendered bias sometimes towards wanting to help and help solve problems, and where young women may be more compelled towards caring professions, where if we situate problem solving in STEM fields and help young women and girls engage in problem solving and following that commitment to care, but through STEM competencies, they see that it's not an either or, but a both and, like deliberately baking in STEM experiences that cultivate their interest in wanting to give back and do good in the world.
And I just wanted to say really quickly, so that family STEM night was very intentionally brought together. Like I only reached out to Black professionals in STEM, and most of them were women, but it was intentional because like we said, we need to see ourselves, but even like other students like that are not Black or Latinx, they need to see like, oh, they can do it too. So I did that intentionally. I don't plan on keeping it that way, but I needed for that first one to be like that.
This is great. I just want to say we're right at time. So I want to give a huge thank you to our three amazing panelists, Amy, Victor, and Juanita. You all had such great insights. We're so grateful you could spend the time with us today. And just want to also say thank you for your ongoing work to support students and schools and families. I'm really excited to have you all as part of this work and to continue to collaborate. I want to thank everyone else for joining us today too. Thanks so much for participating and your questions. Hopefully this was a useful discussion, and we would love for you all to continue the discussion online, again, with #QualityEdChat. If we didn't get to your question, we'll be keeping an eye on that and continuing the conversation. And again, moving forward, we've got 2 more installments in our Quality Education for Every Child series. So next week, we're going to be talking about charter schools. So the topic is Beyond the Talking Points, Charter School Policy and Equity. And that's going to be next Wednesday at 1 p.m. And you can register for that on our website at americanprogress.org. And we'll also be sending out an email notification about that later this week as well. And thank you all again, and have a great rest of your week.